I'm Gavin, and this is MLS Fantasy Picks.
And welcome back. Before we get into round 23 picks, here's a quick round 22 recap. An alright week. I ended with 153 points for round 22. I had a week rank of 625, and my overall rank is now 23. My budget increased to 183 million. What went right? I was glad that I captained Cucho. Great scores from my bench, and I had an awesome 20 points from Wagner. What went wrong? Torres ended up being quite the dud, though he had great matchups, and he landed on a 3 for a double game week. Brutal score. I wish I had Morgan on the field and Torres on the bench. Alright, let's take a look at the MLS Fantasy Picks leagues. Looking at the MLS Fantasy Picks Open League, shout out to Fantasy Soccer Data with 184 points. Pooj, Paintsel, and Peck all had huge scores. And looking at the head-to-head league, still no change. Two teams battling for the top spot. Alright, that's enough. Let's get into round 23. At keepers for this week, I feel like the chalk front end of the keeperoo will be Matt Freese. New York City's got a great matchup against Chicago. And then moving to the later games, it gets a bit iffy. I feel like your only safe bets are the Portland and the Galaxy games. I might want to use my Galaxy players for midfield and forwards. And overall, I just don't really trust Galaxy defense. So maybe you go with Pantomis for Portland. Or if Freese and New York City give up that goal early, maybe you could go to McMath because I like Real Salt Lake's chances against San Jose as well. Another fun one, though probably not a popular one, I feel would be Fry, as they are the early game this week, I think by like an hour before New York City. And you at least could see all of that game before you could pivot to a McMath, so it gives you a bit more flexibility. I'm not a huge fan of Minnesota, and Seattle are away. Bit of a flyer pick, but could be a fun one this week. Or if you went with Fry and they lost the clean sheet early, you could always pivot to Freeze. Taking a look at defense this week, so I feel like my lock this week would be Jordi Alba. Minnesota. Miami could give up some goals to Cincinnati, though I still like Alba's attacking bonus. I think he's a great shot this week. And then as I was speaking with keepers, I do like Martin's, NYCFC versus Chicago. It's a great matchup. He's a great defender. Could be a lot of good points there. Again, the Houston-Toronto game could also be pretty nice. I like Mikhail for Houston. Zimmerman, I also feel, is a pretty fun shout with Austin away at Nashville. I feel like Zimmerman's, been solid in defense. I know Nashville hasn't been awesome this year, but Zimmerman's still a good fantasy asset. And then another fun one that I've called out, as I said, for the keepers. You can call me crazy, but I just feel it gives you a bit more flexibility with your defensive switcheroos this week. I don't really like a lot of the 10-30 defensive options. So if you go with Reagan on the front end, and then you can pivot to, say, someone like a Glad or Katranis or Vera from Real Salt Lake, I feel like that's a good switcheroo option. Just because there's not a lot of great options this week, it could give you some flexibility there. So I maybe you're looking at Reagan this week for bench play. And now we're taking a look at midfield. So Acosta, I like, they're away against Miami, but it's Acosta. Hopefully he's feeling healthy enough to play. And then Santi, definitely a lock for me this week. Plenty of New York City guys on my team. I love that matchup against Chicago, and they're at home. And then Hector Herrera, the floor / bonus point machine. They're home against Toronto. I like Herrera this week a lot, even though there are plenty good options for midfield. And then Pooj, of course, LA versus Atlanta. I'm interested to see, how that team looks from a fantasy side as they continue to bring on more players. And then I also like Evander, the King, Portland versus St. Louis. I did hear that he could be injured, so just keep an eye out for the lineups. But you could always, swap to Paintsel with the late game if needed. Some other call-outs I like this week. Rusnak, some more fun Seattle picks here. He's been doing really well from a game perspective and fantasy as well. So I feel like he's a fun option, maybe on the bench with the early game. And then if you really want to take a flyer, look at Mukhtar. They're home at Austin, so it's a decent matchup. But Mukhtar has not been the same fantasy player that we used to know. And looking at forwards this week, I do believe Chicho Arango should be back from his suspension. I see the red dot there, but I think he'll be back. Of course, you love that matchup for Real Salt Lake at home against San Jose. And then Peck, He's been in great form. He's great at home. I like that matchup against Atlanta. He's definitely on my team this week. And for my bench play, I kind of like Benteke. He's definitely hit or miss, so he's always on my bench, at least most of the time. And they have a good home matchup against Dallas. Some other fun plays I like is Suarez, for Miami at home. Could be a good bench play as well. And then Rodriguez from Portland. Could be a good play on the field. You could always swap him out if your bench hits. And finishing off with captains, I like Puig this week. Peck also a good option, but I'm always one to lean towards midfielders when it comes to captains. And if Evander's healthy, I like that matchup. Evander always a good captain choice. Could be worth it. It is good to be back. Welcome back, everyone, to the great game that is MLS Fantasy. Excited to get things going again and finishing this season strong, especially after all of these fun transfers over the summer window. And yeah, good luck this week.